So today is a very special day for us as we begin to welcome people on YouTube who are joining this wonderful opportunity to have dialogue with a very special friend and colleague and very wonderful leader. And before I talk about Rahul, I'd also like to welcome my colleague Ram, who's an alum of SOIL. So the prodigal son of SOIL returns on this forum. And, so nice to have you also, Ram, here. And I think with this, I'm going to start the webinar as well so that people start coming in. And it's a very special day for us because it's also an opportunity for us to celebrate all our alumni working in different parts of the world. And so, Ram, why don't you begin by sharing a little bit about yourself before we turn our light on to Rahul?
Sure. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Anil sir, Bhattacharya sir, and SOIL for this wonderful opportunity to share the stage with two great stalwarts in the industry. So a little bit about myself. I graduated from SOIL in 2012, worked with Ashok Leyland for about 6 years after. And I've always been wanting to follow my passion of getting into consulting and research, which is a very niche area, but I managed to land a gold mine in 2018, and I made the switch to Euromonitor International. I'm currently employed as a consultant in Euromonitor International in Dubai. It's a pleasure to be sharing the platform with you, Rahul and Anil sir. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. You know, the reason Rahul is very special, I've always admired one thing about Rahul. He's defied the logic that a lot of people did who were his people from his cohort who graduated. I don't think anybody from your class would have worked in one company for so long, Rahul. And
there are two of us from the 1994 SIBM batch across all parts of SIBM that are still kind of very
wonderful. How wonderful. You know, a few years back, I was at Harvard Business School talking to colleagues there. And a new book had just come out at that time, a book on Harvard's research called Aligning the Stars. And that book said, based on real research, that people who stayed in one organization for long, they are the ones who become stars. And they are the ones who create the maximum impact. So obviously, in your case, it has happened. So why don't we begin by understanding that, Rahul, that you've done something which only one other member of your cohort does. So what has kept you in the same company for such a long time, so for 26 years?
Well, Anil, first of all, I just want to thank you for this wonderful opportunity to interact with your students, your alumni, and of course, the industry network that you have. I have been a long time admirer of you. When I started my career, I used to hear about you when you were an Aisher. And really it was amazing that you started this very unique institution 12 years ago. So it's such a privilege to be with you. I was really looking forward to this interaction since we last spoke. Well, coming to my career, it's very strange because I spent 26 years with Accenture, which is 24 more than I thought I would be here. Because like everybody else, I thought, I'm just going to be here for a couple of years and then, something else will happen and I'll go elsewhere. But really, I think it's been many different careers and many different companies over the course of the last many years. I'm in my 5th city and 3rd country with Accenture. I've done, all different kinds of jobs. I joined what was then, Ram, you mentioned consulting. When I joined Accenture, was part of Arthur Andersen as a small boutique consulting firm of 70 people in India. Now we have more than 200,000 people, and I was leading HR for the first part of the journey to about 40,000 people, and that was tiring and thrilling and insane and all of that. And then I moved on to doing many different things. So it's, I guess, every now and then I've gotten thrown a very big challenge, which has been entirely different from anything else I've done, and that keeps that distracts me from any other thought. But at a deeper level, I think I guess there's an underlying connection that I felt with our purpose, our mission, our people, and Accenture is a very special place. And my very simplest description of Accenture people is smart people that are hardworking and are good human beings. And so 26 years on, I have friends all over the world that are true friends, not acquaintances. Some are in Accenture, some have gone elsewhere, but we have a deep bond, and it's very special to have had this kind of a career.
How very nice. Rahul, I echo what you say because I worked with one company also for nearly 25 years in Aisha before I started doing other things. And I almost feel even today as if I own that company. I mean, not as a shareholder, but, spiritually, emotionally, and everything else. So now tell me, before we go deeper into what makes Accenture so special and what makes your work special, how did it all begin for you? Who were the people in your life who really impacted you? Describe to us your early part of your journey and what were some of the things that shaped you as a person?
Well, thank you very much for asking, Anil. So I grew up in Delhi. In a university. Both my parents had an academic background. They met when they were doing their PhD in Leningrad in USSR, now St. Petersburg. And they came back, and my father spent his career being a professor in JNU. So I grew up, I say in Delhi, but it was really a very cocooned existence in a beautiful 400-acre campus. In a very eclectic background, every day interacting with people that would get together for potluck dinners and disagree vehemently with each other on everything under the sun, and then they would again meet again and repeat it. And so I grew up in this kind of environment where having a deep passion for your beliefs and what you did was pretty much the norm, and diversity was the norm, and therefore, as I was growing up, I graduated after doing economics honors from Delhi University, and as I was doing that was in 1991, the same year when Manmohan Singh opened up our economy. And at that time, people were pursuing one of two different paths. If you were to not be a doctor or or an engineer, you would either go to civil services or you would go into management, and that's what I saw most of my peers doing. And then I happened to have the JNU library in my backyard, and so I started to kind of explore that. I went and started reading up about management in the JNU library, and I got utterly fascinated by this field, which was then called personnel management. And the reason I got fascinated by that was because I felt that this was the one function within an organization that could help people unlock their potential. And of course, the moment I came out of the library and I started to talk about what I wanted to do, every single person dissuaded me. Parents, family, friends, everybody else is like, no, personnel is not where you go. That's you have trade unions and you'll have to fight trade unions, or it's the agony aunt of the company and so on. But I just got totally fascinated, and that was in 1991. And now in 2020, I'm as much in love with human resources as I was the day I first came across the field. And so you asked about people that have had an influence. I don't have corporate role models really, but people that have deeply influenced my journey are people like Mahatma Gandhi or Nelson Mandela that that operate with a place of deep belief and humility, and kind of stay focused on that. And those are the kind of people I've looked up to.
And were there role models in the family or in JNU or in your extended network at that time whose personal presence or any particular sort of moment that stands out for you, which were like a defining moment? for you in your own life?
Well, I wouldn't say there was a defining moment really, but there've been people that I was very influenced by, and I guess probably there were themes and people that I was influenced by. So, my father was a very unique person in that he charted out his own path. His first person to have a PhD in the family and go to Europe, and he his had abiding friendships and people, from people that he grew up with, but a very upstanding, upright, highly principled person with whom I clashed with for a big period of my life as well. But there were these kind of themes, and then the people that he surrounded himself and my parents surrounded themselves tended to be people that had came from a higher principled moral standing and not very materialistic at all in any way. And so that's what I think I kind of picked up, some amount of idealism, some amount of, imagination that comes when you live in a place like JNU, where you're, in many ways protected from the, day-to-day realities of being out in Delhi streets in some ways. So I guess those were early influences. But diversity stands out a lot because, it was very natural for Professor Anil Hassan and Dr. Sushila Anthony to be in our house every single Diwali, and for us to be in their house every single Eid, and in Sushila Auntie's house every single Christmas. And I still, we still call each other up and wish each other. And I guess that kind of diversity of thought, I guess, has been ingrained in me from very early days.
How very nice. Rahul, now coming to your career in Accenture, having myself worked in consulting companies and professional service firms for a long time, in some respects, the HR function is one of the most critical functions in that organization. And yet, a lot of times the limelight is on all these people working with clients. And the HR function is the internal one that is to enable them to shine. So, in this respect, therefore, one has to literally earn the trust and credibility of the so-called, these people whom industry is continuously looking up to. The stars are in the field interacting with clients, and you at the back are enabling them to be successful. So in this journey, how did you build your own credibility, and what made you earn the trust of your colleagues, and what has resulted in now you're becoming the global head of HR for an organization like Accenture Technology, 250,000 people?
It's interesting that you say that, Anil, and I've actually not felt some of that, and what I mean by that is, we could be a consulting company or we could be a professional services company, but really what we are is a people company. That's all we are. I mean, we manufacture nothing. We have no product to take out to the world. And so the value that we have as an organization to the world is the skills, the passion, and the capabilities of our people, which we take to our clients and communities and shareholders, right? That's who we are. So in a function like this, I guess Accenture, and I felt this from very, very early days, it wasn't about, HR being a back office function ever. It's just not operated that way. It's always had a center stage in how we drive and grow the business. And one of the things that's evolved, I guess, from, I would say, the last 15, 18 years that I can recall, even more, is that Accenture has changed dramatically as a company over and over again. So as I mentioned earlier, I joined a small consulting company of about 70 people in India, where we would have highly qualified MBAs who would come and do this kind of work, and then 2001, we went from, we changed from being a partnership to a public company, and also changed our strategy from being consulting to take a big, gigantic foray into technology and operations. And that whole thing played out in India. As we, between 2001, 2008, that I was there in India, it was the biggest organic growth story in the world, not in Accenture, but it was the biggest organic growth story in the world. And so what our clients value from us is not just advice that our consultants bring, but the very best practices that we actually implement on ourselves. And as a practitioner, as I'm sure there are a lot of practitioners who are even tuning in right now, the high quality analytical advice of where you ought to go is important, but so are lived experiences and best practices. And so I spend a lot of time with clients. My colleagues spend a lot of time with clients. It's in the fabric of how we operate, and I guess it's not really very different. And so if we are not absolutely exceptional at how we lead our people, I don't think our clients would want to work with us the way they do.
In 2005, 2006, I and some colleagues of ours were working with a company. At that time, it was called GDF SOIL, and now it's called NG, perhaps the world's largest energy company. And our project was to help their top X, which is the top, say, 500 leaders globally, to create a new way for the organization, because two big companies were merging. And as a part of that, we were organizing what are called learning expeditions. So for 1 week, we took them to San Francisco. And one day, I remember spending the whole day with the Accenture leadership team in San Francisco. And something which was fascinating, for the first time, we heard something which actually, I was a bit almost shocked by what I heard. They said, there is no corporate headquarters of Accenture. So they said, well, this work is done in this part of the world, this work is done in that part of the world, this is how we collaborate. So it sounded like the most fascinating organization at that time, and this was 15 years back. So tell us, how did that happen, and how did Accenture create this very unique, which was, I think, completely changing the model upside down? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued that caught your attention back then. This comes up very often. Accenture's never had a headquarters, and it's played out. I mean, from then till now, including in the pandemic. One of the reasons I think that we have adapted really, really quickly was because there wasn't a lot of brick and mortar to be attached to. And I really don't know what the history to this is of not having it, but I think it emanates from this very deep belief that we want our people not within the four walls of our buildings, but we want them serving our clients where the clients are operating, and and kind of deeply embedded in the fabric of our clients' work and so on. And so I guess that goes very closely with another enduring value within Accenture is this absolute disdain for status quo. So there is really nothing from the past that we actually hang on to, and there are no vestiges on the past. There are no trophy cases anywhere in Accenture, and therefore it's also a very big signal that you don't build your career wanting to be in a specific place and location and so on, and kind of have a kind of centralized feeling of having arrived or being in power or anything. There's just never been any of that. And the way we've always operated is that we will come together and converge to focus on opportunities, issues, and problems, whether that be for our clients or that be internal, and then we kind of disperse. And so we come together, we disperse, we come together, we disperse. And that's how we've always operated. And I guess that also correlates to kind of another thing that I've seen over the course of our career. We have an extraordinarily diverse leadership team that comes from everywhere. And something about not having a headquarter or not having kind of one place to go to, but really as leaders travel around everywhere, as our people travel around everywhere around the world, great talent emerges, they come into contact with each other, and opportunities arise and people thrive. So if you look at the senior most leaders in Accenture, they pretty much represent every part of the world that we are in, and they've grown up and they've shown up. It's a very natural act for us.
Now tell me another thing. When I was in my initial years, and I used to look up a lot to my mentor, the chairman of Aisha, Mr. Vikram Lal, very fine person. And he and I would often have dialogue on this philosophy that small is beautiful, and this whole thing about Schumacher and how workplace organization need to be organized around empowered smaller teams. And there was this whole feeling that at any time a team becomes more than 500, the personal touch reduces. And so one has to manage a large organization like a small one, those kinds of organizations, because as we were growing by thousands and we were becoming from a small organization to a large organization, this was one concern that we had. And for us, even getting to 8,000 to 10,000 people was large, but for you, now 250,000 people. So how do you build that sort of personal connection in such a large, complex organization?
Yeah, it's and I remember Mr. Lal is legendary. So it must have been very special to work with a person like him. And when I was going through my master's program, Aisha was it's pretty much referred to as the gold standard of of practices that we used to look up to. And I think what you and Mr. Lal talked about, I think holds true, is an enduring truth. And so, yeah, I mean, we have 250,000 people in Accenture Technology. We have 500,000 people in Accenture. So it's big. 2001, when we went public, we were 75,000 people. So, the company's grown, it's become very big. And it is a constant endeavor, and one of the things that makes any organization special, but how do you actually inspire and grow exceptional people? Well, you do that by making the big small. It is absolutely essential to doing that. So I'll take one quick digression on this. So in 2014, 2015, I think. So 2014, our current chief HR and leadership officer, Ellen, took post, and as she and Pierre Nanterme, our then chairman, started talking, one of the things that we learned, we were hearing from across the world, was how outdated performance management was, and how archaic it was, and how much angst, this whole thing about having bell curves and ratings and rankings, etc., and what that would create, and so they asked me to lead the journey on the next era for performance in Accenture, and that's actually what brought me to New York 5 years ago. And so, as we approach that, I won't get into the kind of whole thing about what that was. That's probably a topic in itself. Fascinating research that we did, and we ended up realizing that you couldn't tinker with it at its edges. You had to blow up the whole concept of performance management. But one of the things that we learned was, every year we used to have these engagement surveys that many companies do, right? You do these engagement surveys organization-wide. But one of the things we learned was that engagement is not an organizational issue at all, meaning people are engaged in their immediate context or they're not. And there's nothing an organization can do to change that reality. My reality is shaped by the team or teams that I'm part of, the colleagues that I work with, and the leader that I'm part of, the mission and purpose, and the importance that I feel, and the significance of my work, and so on. So it's very, very contextual. So one of the first things we did was, engagement used to be a board metric in Accenture, and we went and knocked it off. And we said that's a meaningless measure. And so what we've actually gravitated to is is measuring engagement at the team level so that each team knows how well they are engaged, what they need to get to a high performance zone. And their scores, their engagement need not even be known to anybody else, because whatever they have the power to do needs to be with them, and the transparency with them. So I actually deeply agree with that. And in many ways, for us, it's about making the big small and making the big real, and then connecting the dots for having kind of a collective inspiration, but not treating people as if they're in a sea of 500,000 people.
Very nice. I also believe that you are one of the few companies which challenged the sort of thinking behind performance appraisal when you said we are going to get rid of this ritual of once in a year ritual and replace that with something which is much more round the year dialogue rather than that ritual of setting goals and giving feedback. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because what you did was quite revolutionary.
Sure. I mean, it was a very interesting period of my life. So when Pierre and Ellen asked me to do this, and I said, can you help reimagine this? I was like, sure. Really happy to do it, because in 20 years, it was my most hated experience of working in a company. So I went into it with a vengeance, because I was very happy to get rid of something that I really disliked. And so in a nutshell, here's what it was, Anil. What I guess inspired by GE or Jack Welch at some point, the world embraced this whole concept of their top performers, their bottom performers, and everybody else kind of gets clubbed in between. And therefore, what that kind of led to is once a year, we are actually going to get together, not to talk with you, but to talk about you and to make decisions about you. And then we are going to take a label and we'll stick it on your forehead. And you become a high performer or an average performer or a below performer. And then the consequences of that are different based on whatever label you get stuck with. And then it's not just that that label is put on you, it then becomes a tattoo over a period of time, because then if somebody's a high performer the previous year, how are you going to tell them they're not one the next year? It's just an uncomfortable thing to do. And so the halo effect kind of goes on and on. Well, so we did research on this, and we figured that not only were there issues with that kind of, philosophically, and how we actually believe about human beings and their ability to change and adapt and become the best versions of themselves, but it was scientifically invalid as well, meaning that an organizational performance curve was not a bell curve. It was more like what Josh Person later came out with as a power curve and so on. So that was kind of part of why we needed to entirely blow up the concept. And then the second thing was, why would we want to be in the business of managing performance? We ought to be in the business of achieving performance and maximizing performance individually and collectively. And so then we did a big research sprint, and we said, let's find out what are the conditions that create great performance. And we studied, companies that had outperformed others over a period of time. We studied, many different fields of human endeavor to see what creates great performance and so on. And what we learned was really there are kind of 5 principles of great performance. And the first is great performance happens when you do what you love and are great at, meaning you understand and capitalize on your strengths and work at an area of your passion. Great performance happens not as an individual, but as teams. And for teams to be highly performing, they need to be highly engaged. And highly engaged teams are those where people complement each other's strengths and skills, they are aligned to common priorities, and there's a high trust equation. So, there's a set of similar principles, I guess, that underpin what creates great performance. One of those principles is what you talked about, which is great performance doesn't happen when somebody tells me retrospectively once a year all the things that I didn't do right, because I can't go back in time and change any of that. But great performance happens with real-time constructive feedback, so I can keep on getting better at what I do and honing my craft and so on. So that's been the underpinning of what we have done done since, and lot of our clients, I think, have kind of followed that lead, and we've worked with them and so on. But I think that's the key underpinning of performance for us.
Very nice. One last question from my side before Ram takes over and begins to ask questions on his own behalf and on behalf of the audience. And may I request the audience, instead of raising your hand, please type your questions in the Q&A box, or please type your comments in the chat box. Now, my last question to you is that, in SOIL, we have this very unique view about education and higher education. We are trying to put a disproportionate amount of focus on what we call the human being's development. Of course, we are teaching digital transformation and analytics and whatever is the latest thinking that the industry wants us to teach. But we put a lot of focus on things like mindfulness. We put a lot of focus on the practice of compassion. So one day in a week, our students work with an NGO in an environment which is very different from what they were raised in. And then we have a week-long theater simulation for students to explore their ethical and values dilemmas. Because we believe ethics can't be taught through case studies and lectures, but through deep personal exploration. So we have Lushan Dubey and Amrita Lalji and these wonderful theater artists who come and spend a week. So it's a very unusual program because we believe that the being part of education is more important than simply doing and knowing. So how do you resonate with that? Because I know that Accenture also had this global initiative on mindfulness and other things. But what do you think of this model, especially our students who admire Accenture as an employer a lot, would particularly want to know from you to what extent this makes sense to you?
Anil, everything that you've just articulated right now, everything, I think what you are doing is absolutely pioneering, and my prediction is in the coming times, you're going to become a beacon of what education ought to be, business education ought to be, and business practices ought to be in the future, not just in India, but just everywhere. Here's why I say that, and why this deeply resonates with me. So I've come at this a couple different ways, and being a student of human resources from 27, 28 years ago, whenever I did this, I believe we have an incomplete and a highly limiting definition of what we call a person within an organization. And so what we call a person within an organization, for the most part, is really the head, the intellect, right? So we focus on how can we make people very, very productive? How can we give them challenging work? How can our top lines go up, our bottom lines go down, and so on. And it is to do a lot with the head. Now, we do a little bit with the heart, because we realize that we are not robots, and it can't just be about engaging the head. And so, we think of things like recognition and engagement, and how do we make people special and valued, and so on. And so there's a little bit that we go beyond that, but not much. I mean, we do that only because we have to, because if you really suck at it, people are going to leave you and go elsewhere, and so on. And so you've got to do that. Now, this is not a universal generalization that companies kind of deeply believe otherwise, and leaders that believe otherwise. But in reality, there are 4 dimensions to a human being. So there's the head, the intellect, the brain, where we do our critical analysis work and so on, but also where we have a seed of creativity and so on. There's the heart that seeks connection, that seeks recognition, that seeks warmth, seeks community. Then there's a body, and for the most part, we treat this body as the vehicle for carrying our head from meeting to meeting or call to call, as you have. But the body is a source of great intelligence, and the body needs to be nurtured, and we need to listen to the voice of our bodies, because when we don't, all kinds of bad things happen, which I personally experienced as well, and hence have come to this conclusion. And finally, there's a soul that we all have, and that soul has a purpose and has a connection to a universality that it seeks. And this language is not common language within organizations, because it can take us into different realms that we don't want to go to. It can be highly uncomfortable, but it can be also, when I have introduced this, and along with others, when I talk about this, at one, it's a very kind of predictable pattern, because people start to respond from their rational mind, but then they have to let go of their rational mind to access their fuller capacities. And so what you are talking about, and I think what you're putting into practice at very early stages of people's lives before they embark on their wider journey, are these very, very essential ingredients of know that you're more than your head, know that seeking your purpose matters, that our connection to a greater humanity is integral, because we are a part of this planet, and when we do bad things, then we suffer the consequences of those, and therefore serving the community, and so on, and then expanding our entire capacities is very, very important. So I often sit in some of our senior most leadership sessions, and people have come to expect that when I show up as the full package that I am, and then I show up to expand everybody's capacities in a similar way. And so 2 weeks ago we had our top technology leadership team meeting, and out of a 4-hour 2-day session, I spent 2 hours doing these kind of things, bringing in mindfulness and slowing people down. I bring energy medicine, for instance, practitioners into our practice, so that we can understand and connect with the rhythm of our bodies. Just yesterday, Ellen and us, our top HR leadership team, we've just committed to a day of service globally for HR next month, pretty much for the reasons that you have said. Because at the end of the day, no matter how we feel individually about our relative standing, the reality is it's a great privilege, even at this time, to have a job. It's a great privilege to be able to serve clients and companies. And it's a great privilege to do that at a time when humanity is deeply impacted, and therefore we must serve the obligations of this privilege. So I'm sorry, I kind of went a bit beyond what you asked, but it's
no, but thank you. I could see you really feel strongly about this, so thank you. I think that would be music to the ears of all the SOIL stakeholders, so thank you. Ram, your chance to ask your question and questions from the Q&A box. And Ruchi Shah, do please ask your question. Ruchi is my colleague who's raising her hand. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Ram, go ahead. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Rahul, it's been great listening to you. I think it's a testimony to see how Accenture has grown, and how you've kind of made it more a people organization. There are a few things that stuck to me very evidently, and I'll probably come to it towards the end as we summarize. But before that, I remember bumping onto one of your videos in 2018 early on, where I think there was a short video about how people can leverage going from good to great. And you spoke of 3 pillars there, which spoke about, you have the foundational basics, which is the education in what you just said, the head, what the head does, basically. And then there's contextual upskilling of what you do as you kind of grow into your career. And then there's the X factor, where you talk about whether it's the love of impact, or it's the learning, constant thirst for learning that you have. How have you seen this kind of change with the panic that's been set around the world in COVID? Because I'm asking you this because of the outreach that you have and the number of people you interact with. I sense, I've been seeing people who kind of start sensing their X factor or do they have it as a zeal within them to still have a job, to still continue doing what they are passionate about? Or do I need to go by the head and say, okay, this is what I need a job to survive. I need to go in there. How have you seen people coping with this in the COVID pandemic? And how do you think this is likely to kind of evolve in a post-pandemic world?
Well, thanks so much for seeing that video, and I'm glad that it resonated with you. It was one of the things that I deeply thought about for a while. And actually, when I filmed that video, I was really ill that day, but I'd committed to doing it, and I really wanted to do it. So I guess there's probably two distinct but related concepts here. So the path to good to great for me is really regardless of the field of application, whether you're in management or you're a sports person or you're an artist and a musician, or what have you, what are kind of universal truths of how, what conditions create greatness. And so what I mean by foundational skills are the essential things that you need to do at the start of your career, and the start of a journey. If you don't get those foundational basics right, you will never be able to kind of get to anything else. So it's, in human resources, my field, what that means is pretty much three things. It is, right from the start of your career, interacting with people and knowing how they experience their work, and being a trusted advisor to them. It is learning about recruiting and engaging in the act of bringing people into your company, because that's how you learn about your business. And the third is really how do you deploy your talent and the actual tactical aspects of helping people move from one role to another, one job to another. And so that's foundational. And then contextual skills, you build on that, and so you go deeper in a specialization, whatever that specialization might be. So that's kind of one dimension. The other dimension is the industry that you serve and the economics of the business that you have. You really need to understand that. And finally, for me, the X factor is two things at the end of the day, which is what we are doing right now. The passion for learning and constantly seeking how we can actually push the boundaries of the frontiers that we are seeing. And then the other part of the X factor is if you don't fall in love with what you do, the reality is, and I can bet this for every single person that's on this webinar right now, regardless of what we say is important to us, our actions demonstrate that work is by far the most important thing to us. We spend more hours at work than we do in any other dimension of our life, sleep included, vacations included, family included.
Absolutely.
And so why shouldn't it count, right? So that's the kind of foundational premise. Coming to COVID, Ram, I think COVID has impacted humanity. I guess most of us are not 100 years old, so we don't know what happened in 1918 and so on, or at least don't have a lived experience of that. But it has impacted humanity like nobody has known. And what we need to know about COVID is that it is putting us in a constraint and a situation for an extended period of time, in ways that are actually unnatural to how we've been. And so we have to pay attention to that. The second thing is that each one of us is either personally impacted by it or knows somebody that's personally impacted by it, and at times extremely deeply impacted by it. I'm deeply impacted by it because I'm here in New York and my father passed away in June and I couldn't be there with him in Delhi at the last moment, and I've still not been able to meet my mother. It's something that I live with every single moment. And so I can't show up at work not acknowledging that, not knowing that, my colleagues and my friends not knowing that. At some point it's going to affect me. At some point I need to walk away. At some point I need to grieve, right? So I think we need to acknowledge that COVID has created a layer of anxiety that we need to understand, we need to have compassion for, and then we need to have mechanisms to help people deal with that. It just doesn't end with compassion. Compassion otherwise is just, empathy, but we have to go beyond that, and we have to be able to help our people survive and thrive in what is a very, very extended period. So I guess that's my take on COVID, which is it's placing the importance of us having a lens for our people in ways that we were not required to before.
Thank you, Rahul. That was pretty impactful indeed. So I'm going to quickly get into the questions. I've been getting a lot of questions in here. The first one from Ramaraju. He has a question saying, we are all living in a high employee turnover era because of various reasons. What are your suggestions to companies to retain the longest serving employees?
Ramaraju, it's an important question. Thank you for asking that. It's what we talk with our clients every single day, and I think what this is calling upon our clients and what this is calling upon for us is to operate as a responsible business. What we mean by that is this. Companies cannot be in a place where when their demand or their services get impacted, there's a direct impact of that in terms of letting go of their employees, of letting go of, of their talent simply because it's not there. It requires us to dig deeper. Well, and some of that might happen because you still might need to do it. But companies need to go the extra mile to invest in building the skills of their people. And so it's not even so much about tenure. It is really about placing an importance to investing in skilling up your people because of two reasons. One, I mentioned earlier on about how this is impacting people. What I didn't mention is how is this impacting companies? And one of the things that the ways COVID has impacted companies is it has massively accelerated their digital transformation, their journey to cloud computing, and so on. And so what that means for people, therefore, is it's going to radically transform people's jobs very, very quickly. So if companies don't invest in skilling up their people, they're not going to be able to be to transform their own companies digitally. They're going to become laggards. It's just going to be a bad impact. So it's in the deepest vested interest of companies to invest in reskilling their people because it's needed. But the other reason it's needed is that it then helps people go out, even if they, if the opportunities don't exist within the companies, and they can go out and they can find different opportunities. And we in companies can only thrive if our society thrives. We can't thrive despite our society. And so the more we do this, it's good for us, it's good for our people, it's good for the society, and therefore, again, it's good for us. So I don't know if that can address the question, but this is a big imperative. We are investing more in skilling our people than we've ever done throughout this entire period.
Thank you, Rahul. The next questions, I'm going to combine a couple of them because they're similar. It's from Shivani Bhatnagar and an anonymous attendee. Shivani asks, I was going through Accenture's Getting to Equal report and absolutely loved the process of building leaders as culture makers. I would really want to know more about this initiative.
Shivani and the anonymous question. Thank you so much for that.
The anonymous is on high performance culture. So it's basically understanding what makes Accenture's culture.
Well, it's exactly the same thing. It's the journey to equality. And this started off with our previous CEO, who very, very unfortunately passed away in January of 2019. We still miss him deeply. And when Pierre took over as CEO, he came into that role with a deep belief that we needed to be a company of equals and we needed to be the champion of equality. And I guess he himself came to that conclusion because he had one daughter. And he realized when he was appointed when he became chairman and CEO of Accenture, was that it was such a huge privilege. And there's a beautiful video he's once done. If anybody were to Google Pierre Nanterme, Dear World video, it's a beautiful, beautiful video, which is his ode to his daughter, but the responsibility that he felt that with such a huge platform that Accenture could do. And so we committed that by 2025, we're going to be 50-50, meaning we're going to be gender equal by 2025. And we are completely on track to get there. And there is so much that goes behind it. You just can't make a statement like that and it doesn't happen. You get very, very programmatic, and you look at your practices, your recruiting mix, your promotion pipelines, and the equality at every single decision you're making about your people. So it goes very, very deep in the company for us to be able to do this. But then it goes beyond that, because you have to innovate to get to equal. The same practices that created a culture of inequality for decades and decades is not what's going to get you out of there. So you have to innovate on how you recruit, you have to innovate on how you staff, you have to innovate in how you engage with your clients and help them understand the importance of this. You have to change your practices so that you're equally valuable. So it's just, it's a big, big undertaking. And then all the research that we have done has basically shown us that diversity is not good to have. Diversity is a foundational condition to innovation and high performance. It is, this is published research. We've actually published that. Having been in this journey for a few years, I've begun to ask this question of, what beyond gender equality, what beyond the way we think of inclusion and diversity, which has to do with the outer form in many ways, right? My skin color, my sexual orientation, my gender, whether I'm able or not able to do certain things, and so on. But how, what's the next kind of aspiration of inclusion, of belonging, and equality? And I guess that's where what you're doing at SOIL, Anil, is foundational, because it's recognizing the true potential and beauty that's inherent in all of us, and creating the conditions for that to thrive. And I guess that's the next frontier that we should aspire for.
Thanks, Rahul. The next question is from Narendra Paul. Narendra Paul is from Cord. He asks, what are the common key or core principles of team management in rural development professionals to serve the bottom of pyramid in rural India, as well as corporates like Accenture?
So, let me say something about Narendra. He is working with the Chinmaya Organization of Rural Development, which has, for example, completely transformed the lives of 800 villages in Kangra district. And they work with the poorest of the poor and on women empowerment. And they have done some absolutely amazing work there. So he's trying to learn from your experience and apply it to his context.
Thank you, Anil, for that qualification. And Narendra, I'm just going to be very honest and say that I would love to learn from you, because the work that you're doing, in rural India, and making a real impact in ways that I have never been able to do. Right? I mean, I don't have any qualifications that could stand that that could help. And my only window into this has been in two parts of the world. I was an independent director on the board of Madura Microfinance some years ago, which had a very similar mission. And so I used to go to rural India and in Tamil Nadu, really, and in villages of Tamil Nadu, and through that exposure. And one of the things that I learned, Madura was very special. It was founded by these three gentlemen, with the belief that women empowerment was critical to societal growth. And so the microfinance model used to be women-based and group-based, not individual-based, but group-based. So I don't really know how my experiences here could be of value to really what you're doing. I'd be happy to have an offline conversation really to learn about the work that you're doing and, share practices that we can have. But in all honesty, you're very likely doing pioneering work that the rest of the world needs to learn about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. I'm getting a lot of questions from several people on understanding how the new performance management system in Accenture is faring. Has it worked well in terms of facilitating feedback, open feedback between managers and peers? Has it worked well in terms of going well with the employees across the system? And there are several people asking different angles to the same question. Basically, the success story of how performance management has changed drastically in Accenture.
We are 4 years into this journey now, I think, and we tend to be more critical, I guess, and so. I'm more trained to think about what is not working than what is actually working well. But I think there are a few things that I think it really changed for us. One of the biggest things that changed for us is that our leaders said that they actually started to get to know their people in ways they never knew their people, even though they had worked with their people for a long time. So why is that, right? So in the performance management world, every year, groups of leaders would come together into what I would most generously describe as a dogfight on who gets into the top 25, the next 40, the next whatever, and so on. And so you would show up with a preordained position of what you wanted to defend, and then, it would play out a certain way and you would come to some decisions. What you would not do is talk about what really the person demonstrated and did and how they did what they did. You would certainly not talk about what they are not very good at doing, because that would have a straight correlation into one of the rating categories. And so it was never a discussion about people. It was a discussion about, which box you were trying to get people to land. And that has completely changed, because when you take the ratings out, then you take the threat out. So there is no longer number of slots to be fought for. And so then the conversation becomes about what are the great things that a person did, and multiple people get to know about that. And then in transparency, you talk about what are the gaps and what are the things that people need to grow towards. And then people start getting vested and say, there's this kind of a project that I think this person would do well with, or, maybe I can actually mentor and coach this person, and so on. And so you get vested into people's success. I think that's, one of the big things that's really changed. And I think the other thing that's changed is this whole notion of kind of forward-looking conversations, and we call them talent actions. So when you have these discussions, it's about, what actions will we take, and making sure that you actually follow through with those actions, which help people grow and thrive. On the specific point of feedback, I'm just going to say it's a journey, and we're better than maybe we used to be, but there's so many layers to feedback. I've had many interesting conversations with my friend David Rock, who lives here in New York and has a whole theory on that. And so he and I have collaborated quite a bit, and we've looked at this. But feedback is a hard problem to crack, because the very word comes with a threat connotation, and a threat response therefore related to that to that word itself. So there's a lot that you have to do to go from what Satya Nadella is doing in Microsoft, of getting everybody to the growth mindset, and from know it all to learn it all, and so on. But feedback is a longer and harder journey that needs much more nuance.
Very good. The R.R. Nair, whom you might know from Unilevers, he's listening to you, and some of the questions on feedback were coming from RR.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the questions. Unilever is such an incredible organization.
Yeah.
So we'll take one last question from Ruchi. Okay, so in an endeavor to innovate, how to make sure there is enough bed to absorb failure and every individual feels confident to practice this mindset.
She heads the placement and career services for students. So she has to help students to continuously deal with this aspect as they apply to different positions and so on.
So this is from Ruchi, right?
Yes.
This is from Ruchi, yes.
So what is the appetite to absorb failure? Well, you cannot be an innovation-led company if you're fearful of failure, and yet failure needs to be bounded in that it can't be dramatic and all-encompassing, and it can't be born out of irresponsibility because as a technology company, well, I didn't pay so much attention to my algorithms and therefore they got really biased one way or the other, right? Those kind of things are not okay. But you set aside those extremes. Failure is we don't even talk about it. We often talk about it. It becomes less of an issue when you think of it as experiments or pilots. So many things that we do when we are trying to do something new or different, we go and start up a pilot. And that word gives people a lot of comfort because it's contained, it's small, and you can walk away from it if it doesn't work. And then success has many parents, and so the moment it succeeds, it's like everybody else is kind of taking that on and doing their own flavor, and it takes a greater amplification and impact. And so I wonder what failure would mean in the context of applying for jobs and applying for interviews. I mean, what else would you go through except a journey of exploration that's going to be about some highly inspiring interactions that lead to employment and some dejections that that are otherwise. I talked a little bit about my starting journey, but I experienced pretty significant failure before I even got into HR. So one thing was falling in love with HR. Another thing was getting into HR. XLRI rejected me not once, but twice. And because I couldn't get into XLRI and that's all I wanted to do, I ended up joining chartered. My parents told me, well, maybe you should become a chartered accountant. And so I started my journey as a chartered accountant, which was the most soul destructive years of 6-7 months of my career. And then I tried again and again and again and eventually got in. And so I guess, that's, you got to embrace this. It's going to happen not just at the entry point, it's going to happen once a day. That's something you're trying to do.
Thank you. Ram, time for you to
Thank you, Rahul. Yes.
Ram, time for you to say what you feel about the evening, and then I'll sum up.
All right, perfect. I think a lot of them in the panel are kind of echoing what's running in my head, especially the reflections. Thank you, Rahul. I think this was such an enlightening session, mainly to see how, I mean, my biggest takeaway and what keeps ringing in my head is making big small. And that is so relevant in the present day and age, because you might belong to a company that looks like an ocean, but if you within your team and within your leadership are well motivated and you know where your sole purpose is getting added to a larger objective, it makes all the difference. And so that's my biggest takeaway. But largely said, I think it's great to be sharing the stage with you, Rahul, and it was very inspirational to hear you out on the stage today. Thank you, Anil sir and SOIL, for this opportunity.
So Rahul, here is what I experienced in your presence today. You told us about the whole person. We'll bring our whole selves to work. Yes, the head helps us to make sense of all the stimulation that we get, but the heart, really paying attention to everybody. You reminded us that we are responsible for the vital many and not just the chosen few. And then you said, there is this whole aspect that the body speaks to you. It has an intelligence of its own. And then there is that presence inside you, that consciousness, that living force, the soul. which the nearest we can describe that is when we say what is of deepest importance to us. What is the ultimate purpose of why are we living this life? And what is the meaning I get out of my life? And what do I deeply care about? What are my values? And you reminded us that in these very difficult times, people have to anchor themselves into this, and they have to create the sense of communities, because we are there for each other. We are not just working with each other, but we are working along with each other to make a difference. And then what a great journey you had in Accenture, because you said that you never looked for anything else because there were continuously new opportunities, challenges, and learning. And in that respect, you felt you truly belonged to the organization. So the whole person at work, and work, since it is the most important aspect of our time that we live, I think the way we define ourselves at work has a profound impact on the culture of our society, indeed of our planet. So thank you so much, and thank you for starting this new conversation in workplaces. Our students very much admire Accenture, and now they also understand why when they meet leaders like you as to why the company is doing what it is doing. Thanks a lot, Rahul, for coming to us today, and thank you very much for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ram. Thank you so much, Anil. It's a huge privilege to be with you, and you are doing incredible work. It's very inspirational, and it's been my privilege and honor to be